The first time Noah Cole looked at me, I understood why grown men lowered their voices around his father. I had been in pediatric speech therapy for 6 years, and I'd learned that silence came in different forms. Some children were shy, some were scared, some had built entire worlds behind their eyes and simply didn't trust anyone enough to invite them in. But Noah's silence felt different. It felt sealed. I stood outside the private therapy room on the 8th floor of St. Vincent's Children's Center, clutching a thin patient file that told me almost nothing except his age, 7, and the fact that he had not spoken a single word in 11 months. The rest had been redacted, black lines swallowing whole sections like secrets too expensive to print. Through the glass wall, I could see him sitting on the floor beside a low white table, his small shoulders rigid beneath a navy sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent in Queens. Sunlight spilled through the oversized windows behind him, turning the room golden, but it couldn't warm the way he held himself. He looked like a child who had learned too early that the world could change without warning. "Ms. Bennett," the nurse asked softly beside me. "Whenever you're ready." I nodded, though my pulse had started doing that annoying thing it did before difficult cases, tapping too fast against the inside of my wrist. I was 28 years old, running on 4 hours of sleep and bad coffee, wearing the least wrinkled blouse I owned because the last-minute emergency referral had come in right before I'd planned to go home. I should have been exhausted. Instead, I felt alert in the way people do right before a storm breaks. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound too soft to matter, but Noah still flinched. Not much, just a tiny tightening at the base of his neck. Enough to tell me he noticed everything. Enough to tell me no one in this room had ever truly made him feel safe. "Hi, Noah," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "I'm Claire." No response. He didn't look at me. His gaze stayed fixed on the far wall where a watercolor painting of sailboats hung in a silver frame. Most kids would have looked around the room by now, curious about the stranger. Noah sat as if curiosity had once cost him something. I didn't move closer, didn't ask a question, didn't make the mistake adults always make when a child goes quiet, which is filling the silence with panic. Instead, I set my leather satchel on the floor, knelt slowly, and pulled out the one thing I trusted more than conversation. A sketch pad, a small tin of colored pencils. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, not across from him at the table, but off to the side, where I would be present without becoming pressure. Then I opened the pad and started drawing. Nothing complicated, just a crooked little house, a tree leaning too far left, clouds that looked more like lumpy marshmallows than anything in nature. My drawings had never impressed anyone over the age of 5, which was exactly why they worked. Children didn't need perfect. They needed permission. For almost a minute, the only sound in the room was the faint scratch of pencil against paper and the soft hum of the building's heating system. Then, finally, I felt it. Not movement exactly. Attention. I glanced up just enough to see that Noah was no longer staring at the wall. He was staring at my hands. "This tree's a disaster," I murmured, mostly to myself. I think it might actually be embarrassing. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. It was small, so small another person might have missed it. But I had built my career on small things. I reached into the tin, chose a green pencil, then paused and set it on the carpet between us like an offering. "You can fix it," I said, "if you want." For one long second, nothing happened. Then Noah Cole moved. Noah stared at the green pencil like I had offered him something dangerous. His small hand stayed in his lap, fingers curled tightly into the fabric of his sweater, but his eyes never left it. I kept my own hand still on the sketch pad, resisting the urge to encourage him too quickly. In my line of work, progress did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived like this, in half-breaths and flickers and tiny acts of courage that most people would never notice. The sunlight had shifted across the carpet by a few inches when he finally reached for the pencil. His movements were careful, almost cautious, as if the room itself might punish him for wanting something. But he took it. That alone felt like a miracle. He did not look at me. He did not smile. He just leaned forward and drew one single line across the top of my crooked tree, then another, until a proper canopy began to form where my childish scribble had been. The pressure behind my ribs eased so suddenly I almost laughed. Instead, I just nodded like this happened every day. "That is significantly better," I said quietly. "You may have just saved the whole picture." His face remained serious, but his shoulders loosened by the smallest fraction. I added a patch of grass beneath the tree. He drew an apple hanging from one of the branches. I drew a cloud. He turned it into rain. We went on like that for several minutes, saying nothing, building a little paper world together without a single spoken word. By the time I heard the door open behind me, the page was crowded with color. A yellow sun, a blue house, a red kite caught in the branches. Noah froze the second the handle clicked. Not dramatically, just completely. His hand stopped midair. His whole body locked so fast it made my stomach tighten. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway like he had stepped out of another life entirely. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit so precisely cut it looked expensive even without the watch on his wrist or the polished black shoes that made no sound on the floor. Dark hair, clean shave, composed in a way that would have been attractive if it had not felt so controlled. But it was his eyes that caught me. Green, the same exact shade as Noah's, only colder, older. The kind of eyes that had learned long ago not to show surprise, even when surprise was clearly there. He did not speak right away. His gaze moved from the drawing on the floor to the green pencil in Noah's hand, then finally to me. He took the pencil, he said. His voice was low and even, but there was something underneath it. Not warmth. Not yet. Something more dangerous than that. Hope. I rose slowly to my feet, keeping myself between him and Noah's line of sight without making it obvious. He did more than that, I said. He corrected my tree. Honestly, it needed help. For the first time, something shifted in the man's expression. It was not a smile. It was too brief for that. But the edge of his mouth moved, just slightly, as if he was remembering what one looked like. I am Adrian Cole, he said. No title, no explanation. He did not need either. Men like him carried their own gravity. Claire Bennett. His gaze flicked once to the sketch pad on the floor, then back to my face. Every specialist before you lasted less than 20 minutes. One made Noah cry. Another tried flashcards. One insisted silence was defiance. I folded my arms loosely, partly because the room had gotten colder and partly because I disliked the way his attention seemed to weigh everything. Silence is usually protection, I said, especially in children. Something in his eyes sharpened at that. He understood more than most fathers did. Or maybe he understood too much. Behind me, I felt Noah's stillness easing again, just a little, as if he was waiting to see what this man would do next. Adrian noticed it too. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened before he deliberately relaxed it. He took one step into the room, then stopped, keeping his distance from the drawing on the floor like it mattered. What do you need? He asked. It was such a simple question, but the way he said it told me he was used to solving problems with money, power, access, things that opened doors and erased obstacles. I looked at Noah, then back at his father. Time, I said. Consistency. Quiet. And for no one to force him before he is ready. Adrian held my gaze for a long second. Then he nodded once, as if I had just given him terms to a private contract. You will have all of that, he said. The certainty in his voice should have reassured me. Instead, it sent a strange chill down my arms, because men like Adrian Cole did not sound confident. They sounded abased. And standing there in that bright therapy room, with Noah behind me and a half-finished drawing on the floor between us, I had this sudden, unsettling feeling that my life had just stepped into something far more complicated than a child who could not speak. 3 days later, I was still thinking about the way Adrian Cole had said, "You will have all of that," like the world rearranged itself whenever he decided it should. I tried not to let it bother me. Plenty of wealthy parents were intense when it came to their children. Plenty of powerful men mistook control for care. But there was something about Adrian that lingered after I left the hospital each evening. Something in the stillness he carried, like a man holding back an entire storm with nothing but posture and will. My second session with Noah had been moved from the Children's Center to a private residence on the Upper East Side. That should have been my first clue that normal rules did not apply here. The car sent for me was black, silent, and driven by a man who wore an earpiece and opened doors without ever introducing himself. Manhattan blurred past the tinted window in cold gray layers, winter light reflecting off glass towers, and dirty snow piled in narrow ridges along the curb. I sat in the back seat with my satchel clutched in my lap and reminded myself, more than once, that I was here for Noah, not his father, not the house, not whatever world existed behind the carefully polished surface of the Cole name. The gates opened before we even stopped. Actual wrought iron gates, tall enough to belong to an embassy instead of a private home. Beyond them stood a limestone townhouse, so elegant it looked untouched by ordinary life. For stories, black-framed windows, brass lanterns burning by the front steps though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, quiet hallways, fresh white flowers arranged as if someone had decided even silence should look expensive. I followed a housekeeper up the stairs, the heels of my boots sinking into a runner so thick it muted every step. "Mr. Cole is in his office," she said. "Master Noah is waiting in the sunroom." Master Noah. I nearly smiled at that. It sounded old-fashioned and strange, like something from another century. But when I stepped into the sunroom and saw Noah sitting cross-legged by a low table with the same green pencil from our first session placed neatly beside a blank page, the tension in my chest loosened. He had remembered. More than that, he had prepared. "Hi, Noah," I said softly. His eyes lifted to mine. No flinch this time. No freezing. Just a quiet, watchful look, and then one small movement of his hand toward the chair opposite him, like he was inviting me to sit. I did, trying not to react too visibly to the victory of it. We drew again. A dog this time. Then a park. Then a swing set that Noah shaded so carefully I found myself holding my breath, afraid even excitement might scare the moment away. Twice, I thought I heard footsteps in the hall beyond the glass doors. Twice, I ignored them. I had learned enough already to know that Adrian watched more than he spoke. About 40 minutes in, I reached for a blue pencil at the same moment Noah did. Our fingers brushed. He startled, but instead of pulling away completely, he stayed there for one fragile second, eyes fixed on our hands. "It is okay," I said. "You are okay." His throat moved. Just once. Then again. A tiny effort. A sound almost happened. It rose like something fighting its way through water, then disappeared before it could become a word. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. "That was good," I whispered. "You do not have to force it." Behind me, one of the glass doors opened. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. The room changed when Adrian entered. Not louder, not colder exactly, just sharper, as if every object understood it was being observed. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. I looked back over my shoulder. He had left the suit jacket somewhere, but the white shirt and dark slacks only made him look more dangerous, not less. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms, revealing a watch that probably cost more than my student loans and hands that looked built for decisive things. Noah's body had gone still again, though not in fear. More in caution. I rose from my chair before I could think better of it. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice low, "yes." Adrian blinked once. It was the first sign I had seen that anyone ever surprised him. "Noah almost made a sound," I said. "Then you walked in, and he stopped trying." For one stretched second, the only sound was the fountain outside the glass, water spilling over stone in a soft, endless rhythm. Any other father might have argued, might have taken offense. Adrian just looked past me to his son, really looked, and something in his face changed. Not pride, not irritation, guilt. It was gone so fast I almost doubted it had been there at all. "I see," he said quietly. Then he stepped back toward the door. Before leaving, he met my eyes one last time, and there was something unervingly honest in the way he held my gaze. "Tell me how to stop making this harder for him," he said, "and I will listen." Adrian did listen. That was what unsettled me most. Men with that kind of presence usually nodded to be polite, then did whatever they had planned from the beginning. But over the next 2 weeks, the rhythm of the house began to shift in ways both small and unmistakable. The security detail stopped hovering near the sunroom doors during Noah's sessions. The housekeeper no longer entered with trays unless I asked. Even the music that used to drift faintly through the speakers in the hallway, soft piano, expensive and distant, disappeared completely during the hour I was there. It was as if Adrian had taken my instructions and issued them to the entire building like law. Noah responded to the difference almost immediately. By the 5th session, he was no longer waiting for me in silence with a blank page. He was choosing the pencils himself. Green first, always. Then blue. Then yellow if the day had gone well. Children created rituals when the world felt uncertain. Noah's rituals were careful, precise, and heartbreakingly deliberate. He still had not spoken, but he had begun to communicate in other ways. A tap of his finger against the paper when he wanted me to draw. 2 taps when he wanted a different color. Once, when I arrived 10 minutes late because midtown traffic had turned into a parking lot after an early snow, he looked at the clock, then at me, then crossed his small arms with such perfect disapproval I nearly laughed out loud. "Are you scolding me, Mr. Cole?" I asked as I set down my bag. Noah's expression stayed solemn, but he slid the red pencil across the table toward me, as if to mark my offense officially. "Fair," I said. "I deserve that." He did not smile. Not exactly, but the corner of his mouth moved, just once, before he lowered his eyes to the page. It was the first almost smile I had seen from him, and I carried it home with me like something fragile and bright. I should have kept my focus there, on Noah and his progress and the work I knew how to do. Instead, against my better judgment, I became aware of his father in all the spaces around the edges. Adrian was rarely in the room now, but he was always near. In the study at the end of the hall with the door cracked open. On the terrace just beyond the frost-rimmed glass, talking quietly into his phone while the city stretched out behind him in silver and smoke. Once in the library, standing motionless beside a window with a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand and a file in the other, looking less like a father waiting for news and more like a man trying very hard not to unravel in a house built to hide such things. The worst part was that he had stopped trying to impress me. There were no dramatic gestures, no speeches, no attempts to buy my approval with donations or charm. He simply asked questions when the session ended, and he listened to the answers. What had Noah responded to today? Did tactile prompts help? Was eye contact progress or pressure? Could trauma freeze language without damaging intelligence? The questions were sharp, thoughtful, painfully sincere. It would have been easier if he had been arrogant. Easier if he had acted like the kind of man the rumors in the hospital cafeteria made him sound like. Instead, he was attentive in a way that made me forget myself for dangerous seconds at a time. One Thursday evening, snow tapped softly against the windows while Noah worked on a drawing of a lighthouse, every line ruler straight and patient. When the session ended, a housekeeper came to take him upstairs for dinner. He went without protest, but not before pausing beside me. For one suspended second, he leaned lightly against my arm, just enough for me to feel the weight of trust before he walked away. I stood there staring after him, my throat unexpectedly tight, when Adrian spoke from the doorway. "He does not do that with anyone," he said. His voice was low enough that it felt like part of the room. I turned. He had loosened his tie sometime during the evening, and the top button of his white shirt was undone, making him look less formal, but somehow more dangerous, because nothing about him was softened by comfort. If anything, ease made him harder to ignore. "He is trying," I said. "That matters more than people realize." Adrian stepped into the sunroom, slow enough not to alarm me, though I noticed he still kept a respectful distance from the table Noah used. "You make him feel safe," he said. The words were simple. The way he said them was not. I looked down at the scattered pencils, at the half-finished lighthouse on the page, because looking directly at him suddenly felt unwise. "Children know when they are being watched," I said. "They also know when they are being seen. There is a difference." Silence settled between us, but not an empty one. The snow kept falling outside, whitening the terrace, dimming the city beyond into a blur of softened lights. Then Adrian said, very quietly, "And what about you, Claire? What do you need to feel safe?" I looked up too fast. His expression had not changed. Still composed, still unreadable to anyone who did not know where to look. But his eyes were fixed on mine with an intensity that made the room feel suddenly smaller. That was the moment I understood I had a problem, because for the first time since walking into the Cole townhouse, I was not afraid of Adrian. I was afraid of how much I wanted to trust him. That night, I barely slept. Adrian's question followed me home through slushy sidewalks and subway delays and the sour smell of burnt coffee in my apartment lobby. "What do you need to feel safe?" It was not flirtation. That would have been easier to dismiss. It was worse. It was sincerity from a man I had no business believing. My studio in Queens had always been small, but that night it felt especially temporary, like a place I passed through rather than lived in. The radiator hissed. A siren wailed 3 blocks away. Someone upstairs dropped something heavy around midnight, and I startled so hard I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. By morning, I was annoyed with myself for letting one question get under my skin. I had work to do. Noah mattered. The rest was noise. That was what I told myself as the black car picked me up again the following afternoon and carried me uptown through a city glazed in dirty snow and pale winter sun. The coal townhouse was quiet when I arrived, but not in the polished, curated way I had grown used to. This quiet felt off. Tighter. One of the men by the front door touched his earpiece as I stepped inside. A housekeeper crossed the hallway with her head down and moved faster than usual. Even the air seemed wrong, like the entire building had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. My stomach tightened before anyone said a word. Noah was not in the sunroom. Adrian was. He stood by the windows with one hand braced against the frame, staring out at the terrace where yesterday's snow had melted into narrow silver streams. He turned when I entered, and one look at his face told me everything had changed. He was still composed, still dressed in dark wool and crisp white cotton, and that impossible kind of control that never slipped in public. But there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there before, and the line of his mouth looked carved rather than set. "Where's Noah?" I asked immediately. Adrian's gaze held mine for half a second too long. "With his tutor upstairs," he said. "Something happened this morning." Every muscle in my back went tight. "Is he hurt?" "No." The answer came fast, almost sharp. Then his voice lowered. "No, he is not hurt." Relief came first, bright and brief. Confusion followed. Then what happened? Adrian glanced toward the closed door behind me, as if deciding how much of the truth belonged in the room. "He had a nightmare," he said. "The first one in weeks." I waited. He looked away before continuing. He started speaking in his sleep. My breath caught. "Speaking?" Adrian nodded once. Not clearly. A few words. Fractured. Distressed. But yes. For one disorienting second, hope flooded me so hard it hurt. "That is good," I said, stepping closer before I could stop myself. "Not the nightmare, but the words." "Adrian, that means language is there. It means he is trying to come back." He said your name. The room went still around me. The fountain outside. The city beyond the glass. The distant movement somewhere upstairs. Everything seemed to flatten under the weight of that one sentence. I stared at him. "What?" Adrian's throat moved once. "Claire," he said quietly, looking directly at me now. That was the clearest word. I did not know what to do with that. Training teaches you how to interpret progress, how to pace therapy, how to protect fragile breakthroughs from becoming emotional spectacles. Training does not tell you what to do when a child says your name in the dark and his father looks at you like you might be the only thing standing between them and another year of silence. I looked down at my hands, suddenly aware that I had curled them into fists inside my gloves. "Did he wake up after?" I asked. "Did anyone respond?" I did not. His voice was flat with restraint. I did not want to scare him back into silence if I handled it badly. Something inside me softened at that, despite everything. Men like Adrian were supposed to seize control. He had chosen restraint instead. "For Noah, you did the right thing," I said. "Most people would have rushed in too fast." Adrian gave a quiet, humorless exhale. "Most people in this house rush toward problems because they think action is the same thing as help." I looked up. "And you?" For the first time since I had met him, Adrian's composure slipped just enough for me to see the man underneath. The father. The one who had been standing outside therapy room doors and listening for hope in the scratch of colored pencils. "I have spent 11 months trying not to break what is left of my son," he said. "I do not always know if I am succeeding." The honesty of it hit harder than anything else he could have said. I had expected mystery from him. Control. Distance. I had not expected this raw, careful fear spoken in a voice so steady it almost hid itself. Upstairs, somewhere beyond the carved banister and warm yellow lights, a door clicked softly. Then small footsteps crossed the hall. Adrian's eyes lifted toward the ceiling before returning to me. "He has been waiting for you since noon," he said. I should have gone upstairs immediately. Instead, I heard myself ask the one question I had been avoiding for days. Why does everyone in this house look afraid today? Adrian went still, truly still. Not the controlled stillness I had come to associate with him, but something colder, older, the kind that arrives when a door inside someone closes. "Because," he said after a moment, "there are parts of my life I have worked very hard to keep away from Noah." His gaze held mine with a terrible kind of calm. "And this morning, I learned those parts may no longer be staying where I put them. The words stayed with me as I climbed the curved staircase to the second floor. There are parts of my life I have worked very hard to keep away from Noah. Adrian had said it calmly, but calm can be its own kind of warning. By the time I reached the landing, I could feel the house watching me again. Not literally, not in some dramatic way, just in the subtle shift of staff stepping aside too quickly, in the lowered voices behind half-closed doors, in the silence that fell the moment I passed. Wealth could make a place beautiful. Power could make it obedient. Fear made it quiet in a completely different way. Noah was in the schoolroom at the end of the hall, sitting at a small oak desk with a workbook open in front of him and a tutor speaking softly about fractions. He looked up the moment I appeared in the doorway. The change in him was immediate. Not loud, not obvious, but real. His shoulders dropped. His grip on the pencil loosened. The tutor, a kind woman in her 50s with silver reading glasses and the careful smile of someone used to managing fragile situations, noticed it too. "I think we are done for today," she said, gathering her materials with impressive speed. Noah stood before she even finished the sentence. He crossed the room and stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint shadows under his eyes from the nightmare Adrian had mentioned. "Hi," I said softly. "I heard you had a rough morning." He did not answer, but his gaze held mine for a second longer than usual, and then he reached for my hand. It was the first time he had done that on purpose. His fingers were small and cool and very certain. I let him lead me downstairs without a word. We ended up not in the sunroom, but in the library, a quieter room lined floor to ceiling with dark shelves and old books that smelled faintly of cedar and paper. Snow-bright light filtered through the tall windows, turning the Persian rug pale gold. Noah pulled me toward a low table near the fireplace where a fresh sketch pad and colored pencils had already been set out. Another detail arranged before I arrived. Another sign that Adrian had started anticipating what Noah needed before being asked. We drew for nearly half an hour. Noah sketched a house with 4 windows, then darkened one of them until the square became almost black. I drew a tree beside it. He added a boy standing outside. I added a dog. He shook his head and erased the dog completely. No pets, apparently. I was still smiling at that when a folded piece of paper slipped from between 2 pages of the sketch pad and landed by my knee. I reached for it automatically, expecting one of Noah's earlier drawings. It was not a drawing. It was a newspaper clipping, cut small and folded twice. The paper softened at the edges from being handled too often. The date at the top was from 11 months earlier. The headline underneath made my pulse stumble. "Local philanthropist's wife dies in late-night car accident." I stared at the grainy black and white photograph beneath it. Adrian, expression unreadable even in print, standing outside a church in a dark suit with one hand on Noah's shoulder. Noah looked younger in the photo. Smaller. Still speaking, I thought with a sharp ache I could not explain. The article itself was brief. Too brief. It mentioned the death of Evelyn Cole, praised her charity work, described the incident as tragic, and offered the kind of polished condolences newspapers always use when rich people lose someone beautiful in public. But there was one line near the bottom that made my skin go cold. Noah Cole, 6, was reportedly in the vehicle at the time and has not spoken publicly since the incident. At the time, I looked up too fast. Noah had gone utterly still across from me, his green eyes fixed not on the clipping but on my face. Not scared, braced. Like a child waiting to see whether I would become someone else now that I knew. "Noah," I said carefully, keeping my voice gentle even as my thoughts started racing. "Did you put this here?" He did not move. The silence stretched. Then he gave one tiny nod. I swallowed. "Did you want me to read it?" Another nod. A much smaller one this time. My chest tightened. Children did not hand you the heart of their trauma unless they had decided you might be able to survive holding it. I set the clipping down slowly, making no sudden movement that might break whatever fragile trust had brought it to me. "Thank you for showing me," I said. "I know that was hard." His throat moved. His fingers curled against the edge of the table. Then, very softly, so softly I almost missed it, he made a sound. Not a full word. More like the beginning of one. A breath wrapped around a letter. My heart lurched. "It is okay," I whispered. "Take your time." He squeezed his eyes shut as if forcing language through pain, then opened them again and pushed the clipping toward me with both hands. That was when I understood. He was not trying to tell me about the article. He was trying to tell me about what the article left out. The library door opened behind me before I could decide what to say next. Adrian stepped inside, took one look at the clipping on the table, and all the color drained from his face. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Noah sat frozen across from me, his small hand still resting on the newspaper clipping as if he had forgotten to pull it back. Adrian stood in the doorway with one hand on the brass handle, every line of his body gone rigid in a way that made the room feel instantly colder. I had seen him controlled. I had seen him thoughtful, attentive, dangerous in that quiet, expensive way men like him seemed to perfect. I had never seen him look unguarded. This was not anger. It was worse. It was fear wrapped in shock, and the sight of it made my own pulse start to pound. Adrian recovered first, though only barely. He crossed the room slowly, not toward me, but toward Noah, and knelt beside his son's chair with a care that told me he was measuring every movement. "Noah," he said softly. His voice did not crack. It came close. "Did you show this to Claire?" Noah did not nod this time. He did not have to. The clipping lay between us like a third truth no one had wanted in the room. Adrian looked at it for one long second, then at me. Something unreadable passed through his eyes, some calculation collapsing under the weight of a choice already made. "Leave us," he said quietly. He was not speaking to me. A man I had not even noticed standing just outside the library door disappeared instantly, as if Adrian's voice had erased him. The door clicked shut again. The silence that followed felt enormous. I turned back to Noah. "You are not in trouble," I said before either of them could speak. It mattered that he heard that first. His fingers loosened slightly on the edge of the table. Adrian closed his eyes for half a breath, then opened them again and looked at his son with an expression so raw it made my throat tighten. "No," he said. "He is not." Noah's gaze moved between us, watchful, tense, carrying too much understanding for a child his age. Then he pushed the clipping farther across the table, not to me this time, to his father. Adrian stared at the paper but did not pick it up. "You kept it," he said, barely above a whisper. Noah gave one tiny nod. I looked from one to the other and felt the shape of something terrible settling into place. This clipping was not just about his mother's death. It was a marker, a wound preserved in print, evidence that somewhere inside Noah's silence, memory had been alive all along. "He wants the truth," I said softly. Adrian's jaw tightened, not in disagreement, in pain. He stayed kneeling beside Noah, but his attention shifted to me for one heavy second. "There are truths a child should never have to carry. He is already carrying them," I said. "That is why he cannot set them down." Adrian looked away first. The fire in the hearth gave a low crackle, warm and civilized and completely useless against the cold settling under my skin. Noah reached for a pencil, the same green one he always chose first, and drew a shaking line across the corner of the clipping. Then another, then a small square. A window. My breath caught. It matched the drawing from earlier. The darkened window in the house. He added a second shape beneath it. A stick figure. Then another, taller one beside it. He pressed the pencil harder, almost tearing the paper. Adrian saw it too. I knew he did because the color left his face all over again. "He remembers," I whispered. Adrian's silence was answer enough. I turned to him fully then, my heart beating too fast, anger rising with fear in a way that made my hands cold. "You knew he remembered more than anyone realized." Adrian stood up too quickly, then caught himself, as if even his own reaction had become dangerous. "Claire." No, my voice came out sharper than I intended, but I did not take it back. "You asked me to help him. You asked me to help your son find his way back to language, and all this time there was something sitting underneath every session, every drawing, every single silence, and you did not tell me." Adrian looked at Noah before answering, as if making sure his son was not unraveling under the sound of raised voices. When he spoke, his tone was low again, controlled by force. I did not know what he remembered. I only knew what I feared. "What exactly are you afraid he saw?" Another pause. Another door closing behind his eyes. "Enough," he said. It was one word, but it landed like something final. I stared at him. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give you." There it was. The wall. The line between the father who watched his son's drawings like they were oxygen and the man whose life made entire rooms obey him. My chest tightened with a sudden, painful clarity. I had stepped closer to Adrian because I thought there was honesty underneath the control. Maybe there was. But honesty with limits was still a kind of lie. Noah made a small sound then, not quite a word, more protest than language, and both of us turned toward him instantly. His eyes were wet, not with tears exactly, but with strain. He looked at me, then at Adrian, and the panic I had been trying to keep out of the room rose all at once. This was the cost. Not mystery, not tension. A child caught between truth and the adults too damaged to name it. I took a step back from the table because suddenly staying there felt impossible. I cannot do this blind, I said, looking at Adrian, but careful to keep my voice gentle for Noah's sake. I cannot help him heal inside a story everyone keeps editing. Adrian's face went still in that terrible way I had come to recognize. Claire. It was not a warning this time. It sounded too much like defeat. I picked up my bag from the chair by the fireplace with hands that did not feel steady anymore. Every instinct in me screamed to stay calm for Noah, to protect the fragile trust in his eyes. But another part of me, the part that still belonged to myself, knew I had just reached the edge of something I should never have stepped inside. I am leaving for today, I said softly to Noah. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. He stared at me like I had knocked the ground out from under him. Then his mouth opened, his whole body straining with effort, so fierce it seemed to shake the air between us. A sound came out. Thin, broken, but real. Do not. I froze. Adrian froze. Noah's eyes locked on mine, green and terrified and unbearably clear, and for the first time in 11 months, his silence broke just enough to beg me not to go. Everything inside me stopped at the sound of Noah's voice. It was only 2 words, fragile and breath-thin, but they landed harder than any shout ever could have. Do not. His mouth stayed open after the sound left him, like even he could not believe it had happened. The room went silent in that stunned, holy way people go quiet around miracles. I felt my bag slip from my fingers and hit the rug without a sound. Noah, I whispered. His chest rose too fast beneath his sweater. His eyes were fixed on me with a desperation that did not belong on a 7-year-old's face. He had said the words to keep me from leaving. Not because he was ready. Not because the moment was perfect. Because he was scared I would disappear before he could hold on. I crossed the space between us slowly, careful not to break whatever had just cracked open inside him. Then I knelt beside his chair and held perfectly still until he made the choice himself. 1 second passed. Then another. Then Noah moved, turning out of the chair and into me with all the awkward force of a child who had been brave too long. He pressed his face against my shoulder and gripped the fabric of my coat in both hands. I wrapped my arms around him automatically, one hand at the back of his head, the other between his shoulders, and felt him trembling. I am here, I said softly into his hair. I am here. I am not leaving right this second. You are okay. Across the room, Adrian had not moved. I could feel him there, silent and motionless, watching his son cling to me like I was the only steady thing left in the world. I did not look at him. Not yet. Noah's breathing gradually slowed, though every few seconds his fingers tightened again in my sleeve as if checking to make sure I was real. You did something very brave, I murmured. Do you know that? He stayed tucked against me for a few more seconds, then drew back just enough to look at my face. His eyes were bright and exhausted and full of fear. I had seen that look before in children who thought speaking would make the bad thing real. Sometimes silence becomes a locked door because the truth on the other side feels too heavy to survive. You do not have to say anything else today, I told him. You already did enough. He swallowed. Then, with visible effort, he turned his head toward his father. Adrian's expression changed so subtly that anyone else might have missed it. But I saw it. The absolute devastation of love held under control by a man who had probably spent his whole life learning that control was the same thing as strength. He took one careful step closer. Noah, he said. His voice was deeper than usual, roughened at the edges. You are safe. Noah flinched. Not away from him exactly, but inward, as if the words themselves pressed against something painful. Adrian stopped immediately. That one instinctive pause told me more than anything else could have. Whatever lived behind this family's polished walls, Adrian would rather stop breathing than frighten his son further. Noah looked between us again, panic flickering back into his face, and then he did something I had not expected. He reached one hand toward Adrian without letting go of me with the other. For half a second, Adrian just stared at that small, outstretched hand like it was the most dangerous thing he had ever been offered. Then he crossed the distance and knelt on Noah's other side. He did not touch him right away. He let Noah choose. When Noah's fingers curled around his father's hand, Adrian bowed his head once, briefly, like a man hit somewhere private and vital. We stayed like that for a long minute, the three of us on the rug beside the low table, the newspaper clipping still lying there between scattered pencils and half-finished drawings. It should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing in the room. Noah was the one who broke the silence. His voice came out uneven, catching on the shape of the words like he had to remember how language worked. "Mama," he whispered. Adrian shut his eyes. I felt it happen beside me, the way grief can move through a body without making a sound. "Yes," he said quietly. Noah's fingers tightened around both our hands. Dark. The word barely made it out, but I understood it immediately. Not the literal dark. The memory of it. The unknown shape children give to terrifying moments when they do not yet have adult language for what happened. I felt Adrian go still again, but this time I did look at him. His face had gone pale with the effort of staying composed, and in his eyes I saw the answer to the question he would not give me. Noah had not just remembered an accident. He had remembered fear before it. Fear inside it. Fear attached to something Adrian believed was his fault. "Noah," I said softly, drawing his attention back to me before the room tipped into something too sharp for him to hold. "You are doing so well. Can you tell me one thing? Just one. When you think about that night, do you feel scared because you remember losing your mother, or because you think your father cannot protect you?" Adrian looked at me then, startled, maybe even offended, but he said nothing. He knew why I was asking. Trauma binds itself to meaning. If Noah believed the world was unsafe, that was one kind of wound. If he believed his father was the danger, or had failed to stop it, that was another. Noah's breathing quickened again. He pressed his lips together, trying so hard it made my chest ache. Then he looked straight at Adrian and forced out one more word. "Crying." Adrian inhaled sharply, the sound almost invisible, but not quite. Noah was not afraid of him. He remembered him grieving. He remembered his father breaking. And somehow that had frightened him just as much as everything else, because children are not built to watch their strongest person fall apart. The realization hit me all at once, clean and painful. Noah had gone silent not only from loss, but from shock. From seeing that his father, the center of his world, could be helpless too. I looked at Adrian and saw that he understood it the exact same second I did. The mask he wore for everyone else did not shatter. It softened, which was somehow worse. "He saw me after," Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not to me, to himself. In the street. "He saw me after." Noah leaned weakly against my shoulder, wrung out by the effort of speaking, and I tightened my arm around him. There it was. The missing piece. Whatever had happened that night, Noah's silence had not been protecting only him. It had also been protecting the memory of his father in pain. I should have felt triumph, clinical satisfaction, relief that the break had finally come. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous settle into my ribs, because the man kneeling across from me no longer looked untouchable. He looked human, broken in the most careful possible way. And when his eyes lifted to mine over Noah's bent head, there was no power in them at all. Only gratitude. Only fear. Only the awful, quiet truth that I was now standing inside a grief neither of us could pretend was simple anymore. Noah slept on the library sofa an hour later with his head resting on a cream cashmere throw and one small hand still curled around the green pencil he had refused to let go of. Emotional breakthroughs exhaust children in ways adults never understand. They use every part of themselves to reach across the distance, and afterward there is nothing left but trembling and sleep. I stood by the fireplace with my coat still on, watching the rise and fall of his chest while snow tapped softly against the tall windows. The house had gone silent again, but not with fear this time. With caution, with the fragile reverence that follows something sacred. Adrian stood a few feet away near the drinks cabinet, though he had not poured himself anything. His hands rested flat against the dark wood behind him as if he needed the support and refused to show it. Neither of us had spoken for several minutes. There was too much in the room now. Too much truth. Too much grief. Too much of whatever had begun growing between us in the spaces no one had named. I finally turned away from the sofa and faced him. He does not need silence anymore, I said quietly. He needs honesty he can survive. Adrian held my gaze. The shadows under his eyes made him look older tonight, not in years, but in weight. And can he asked, survive it? I looked at Noah first before answering. Not all at once. Not in adult language. But children already know when a story is broken. They do not need perfect explanations. They need something they can trust. Adrian lowered his head for a second, then looked back at me. I thought if I kept enough away from him, I could bury it. His voice was steady, but only barely. What happened to Evelyn? What happened after? The people around us. The fear. All of it. I thought if Noah only remembered warmth and routines and the sound of my voice reading to him at night, maybe the rest would lose its shape. I folded my arms against the cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Trauma does not lose its shape, I said. It waits. Adrian gave a short, humorless breath that almost passed for a laugh. Yes, I know that now. I studied him for a moment. Really studied him. The severe lines of the suit. The expensive watch. The face every room rearranged itself around. None of that mattered here. Not in front of a sleeping child and a newspaper clipping worn soft by grief. What really happened that night? I asked. Adrian went still, but he did not shut down the way he had before. He looked toward Noah again before answering. There had been threats for weeks, he said. Not against Noah. Against me. Against anyone connected to me. Evelyn knew enough to be careful, but not enough to be afraid every minute. That night she insisted on taking him to a holiday concert downtown because she wanted one evening that felt normal. He stopped, jaw tightening once before he forced himself to continue. The driver took a different route home. There was black ice. Too much speed. Too much panic. By the time I reached the scene, she was gone and Noah was awake in the back seat. He swallowed. He saw everything that came after. The lights. The street. Me. I let the quiet settle so he would not have to rush the words. And you believe your world put her in that car in the first place, I said. It was not exactly a question. Adrian looked at me with the kind of honesty that only comes after resistance has failed. Yes. No excuse. No deflection. Just that. A single syllable heavy enough to alter the air in the room. I nodded once, because there was nothing gentle to say to a truth like that. Then that is where you begin with Noah, I said. Not with details. Not with things a 7-year-old should never have to carry. But with the truth he already knows in his body. That something bad happened. That his mother loved him. That you were devastated, and he saw it, and none of that was his fault. Adrian's eyes did not leave mine. And what about my fault? There it was. The question beneath every other question. I should have answered like a clinician. Clean. Boundaried. Professional. Instead, I answered like a woman who had spent weeks watching him love his son in every careful, broken way he knew how. Guilt is not the same thing as usefulness, I said quietly. If you want to honor what you lost, then be someone Noah can trust now. Something shifted in Adrian's face at that. Not relief. He had not earned that yet and knew it. But something gentler. Something almost stunned. He took one slow step toward me. Then another. He stopped close enough that I could catch the scent of cedar and winter air clinging to his coat. Close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to keep looking at him. You should not be standing in the middle of my life. Making sense of things no one else can reach, he said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was emotion underneath it now, deep and difficult and dangerously sincere. It is becoming impossible to pretend your presence means only one thing. My pulse tripped hard against my throat. This was the line, the one I had felt approaching for days. I should have stepped back. I should have reminded him that I worked for his son, that grief distorts attachment, that proximity can feel like intimacy when people are drowning. All of that would have been true. None of it came out. Adrian, I whispered. He closed his eyes for half a second, as if hearing his name in my voice cost him something. When he opened them again, there was nothing cold left in his expression. I know, he said. You are the one woman I should leave untouched by all of this. The one person in this house who still belongs to a cleaner world than mine. His gaze dropped briefly to the sleeping child on the sofa, then returned to me with painful steadiness. But every time Noah breathes easier when you walk into a room, every time you look at him like he is not damaged but simply waiting, every time you speak to me as if I am still capable of becoming someone better than the man I was that night. I fail a little more at keeping my distance. My heart was pounding so hard it made it difficult to think. Outside, the snow kept falling over Manhattan, softening rooftops and traffic, and every hard line the city insisted on keeping. I should have said no. I should have protected the last clear boundary either of us had left. Instead, I heard myself say the most dangerous truth I had told in years. I am not afraid of your feelings, I said softly. I am afraid of what your world will do to them. Adrian stared at me as if I had reached into his chest and named something he had not wanted anyone to see. Then, very slowly, he lifted his hand. Not to touch me. Not yet. Just close enough that the space between us changed shape. That, he said, voice rougher than before, is the first reason I have heard that makes me wish I could walk away from everything I built. Neither of us moved after that. The distance remained. Necessary. Charged. Honest. Behind us, Noah shifted in his sleep and murmured something too soft to catch. We both turned instantly toward the sofa, every other complication falling away in the face of that small sound. And in that moment, I understood the cruelest part of all. Adrian Cole could command entire rooms without raising his voice. He could bend fear into order and grief into discipline and chaos into silence. But the only two things he truly wanted in that library, his son's trust and my heart, were the only two things power could not buy.